The Indian Army has said that the Union budget has dashed its hopes and has delivered a little setback. In an explosive testimony before the Parliamentary panel on defence, the Vice Chief of the Army, Lieutenant General Sarath Chand, made these stunning remarks. He said, and I quote, "The budget 2018-19 has dashed our hopes and most of what has been achieved has actually received a little setback," end of quote. That's not all. The Vice Chief of the Army went on to say, and I quote again, "There is an overall shortfall of around 12,296 crores as far as capital is concerned," end of quote. Before I bring you more from the Vice Chief of the Army's deposition, here's what the Finance Minister had to say in his budget speech on defence allocation earlier this year.
Ever since the NDA government assumed office, a lot of emphasis was given to the modernizing and enhancing of the operational capability of the defence forces. A number of initiatives have been taken to develop and nurture intrinsic defence production capable of making the nation self-reliant for meeting our defence needs and ensuring adequate budget support to our priority.
Well, that was the Finance Minister in the budget saying, and I quote, "Ensuring adequate budgetary support will be our priority." But here's what the Vice Chief of the Army has told the Parliamentary panel after the Union budget. Lieutenant General Sarath Chand said, and I quote again, "Allocation of 21,388 crores for modernisation is insufficient even to cater for committed payment of 29,033 crores for 125 ongoing schemes, emergency procurements and other requirements," end of quote. There is the Vice Chief of the Army saying that the budget allocation for modernisation is insufficient. Let's go across now to our colleague Rituparna Bhuyan, who broke that story on what the Vice Chief of the Army deposed to the Parliamentary panel, with more on what he had to say. Ritu, over to you.
Shereen, there are some strong words used by both the Vice Chief of Army and the Parliamentary panel on defence. So let me start with what Lieutenant General Sarath Chand said on the government's Make in India mission for defence. He said, and I quote, "We in the Army have identified as many as 25 projects for Make in India. However, there is not adequate budget to support this, as a result of which many of these may end up foreclosed," end of quote. That's not all. He went on to say that some of the crucial indigenous manufacturing targets could be missed. I'm quoting the Vice Chief of the Army again, and he said, "In the Army, we are looking forward to manufacturing the future-ready combat vehicle, FRCVs and FICVs through these schemes." He means strategic partnership. However, with the kind of budget that has been allocated, this may get delayed by a few years, end of quote. The Parliamentary panel is largely backing the Vice Chief of Army and used some strong words in its response. The panel said, and I quote again, "The committee are aghast to note this dismal scenario where the representatives of the services themselves frankly explained the negative repercussions on our defence preparedness due to inadequate allocation in capital ahead," end of quote. And it's not just the Army. Even the Indian Navy in its deposition highlighted the lack of funds. The Navy representative said, and I quote, "There has always been disparity over the last 3 years, 3 financial years in the modernisation budget versus committed liability. We do this by managing our budget through the financial year by deferring certain committed liability payments so that we earmark a certain amount of our modernisation and new schemes," end of quote. Back to you, Shereen.
Thanks very much, Ritu, for taking us through that. Now, here is the exact amount the three wings of our defence forces asked for and how much was granted by the government. The Indian Army asked for over 44,000 crore rupees. They got nearly 27,000 crores, leaving them with a shortfall of 17,700 crore rupees. The Indian Navy asked for over 35,000 crore rupees. The government granted them just over 20,000 crore rupees, leaving the Navy with a shortfall of nearly 15,700 crore rupees. The Indian Air Force asked for over 77,000 crore rupees. They were granted less than half of that amount, leaving them with a shortfall of nearly 42,000 crore rupees. So what does the road ahead look like? Joining us now to discuss this further is General VP Malik, former Chief of the Army Staff, Lieutenant General Kadyan, former Deputy Chief of the Army Staff, and Ajai Shukla, columnist on strategic affairs, defence and diplomacy. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. General Malik, if I may start by asking you, sir, and the fact that we've actually seen a decline as far as capital allocation is concerned versus revenue allocation in the defence budget is not a surprise. In fact, the committee notes that that decline has been on since 2012-2013. But the comments that have come in the oral deposition of the Vice Chief of the Army Staff, and, just in terms of preparedness and in terms of the state as far as our forces are concerned. And let me quote to you. The state today is 68% of our equipment is in the vintage category, with just about 24% in the current and 8% in the state-of-the-art category. In that context, sir, when you hear about the armed forces saying that the allocation is insufficient, how concerned would you be?
Very, very concerned. And I'm not surprised with the kind of frustration that is now being conveyed by the serving officers to the Parliament Committee and others. This is a topic which has been going on for a very long time. And frankly, I'm getting an impression that neither the present government nor the last government, none of them were interested in defense preparedness. They never took it seriously. And the lack of modernization has been, it's a frustrating issue with the armed forces. And you will probably hear more and more about it, because the kind of support that is being given financially, it's just not, nobody can really make do with this kind of weapons and equipment. Today we have, as you said yourself, 68% of the equipment that the armed forces have, particularly the army has, it is antique equipment,
yes,
if I can say, and only about 24% or so, which is something which is going on. And only 8% of the equipment that we hold is state-of-the-art equipment. So there is a huge amount of money required. That is one issue, which is, as the Vice Chief has expressed it candidly. The other issue is that while the Prime Minister is pushing for Make in India campaign, but we are not able to support it financially. So if you have no money, where will be the Make in India campaign? So that is also affecting our own capability to manufacture weapons and the reliability that we want to have within our own country. So it's an issue which is, I would say, frustrating the minds of people who are serving as well as those who have been in service earlier, like me.
Okay, you're saying that this is an issue that is frustrating people in the armed forces, serving officers, as well as people like yourselves who are watching on the sidelines. Lieutenant General Kadyan, if I may come to you, sir, since General Malik brought up the issue about Make in India, and I go back again to the Vice Chief's deposition, sir, and he says in this that Make in India is a great step taken by the Ministry of Defence towards development and self-reliance in keeping with the vision of our Honourable Prime Minister. But he goes on to say, we in the Army have identified as many as 25 projects for Make in India. However, there is not adequate budget to support this, as a result of which many of these may end up foreclosed. So do you agree with what General Malik just alluded to, that there is a lot of talk, there is perhaps a lot of lip service when it comes to strategic partnership, Make in India, FDI in the defence sector, but not enough action on the ground?
Shereen, I agree with what General Malik says fully. Vice Chief of the Army Staff is a professional. If he has been constrained to openly point out to the Defence Committee that there are serious shortages, he is backed it by facts and figures, as you just mentioned about the vintage equipment and the current equipment and the state-of-the-art being only 8%. It's a serious matter, and the country needs to take note, and country needs to find resources. To understand the defense budget requirement, let me start with a famous quote, a wish that people make for the defense forces: may they never be wanting, and may they never be wanted. Nobody wants a war. Armies are not meant to fight wars. They are meant as a deterrent, to prevent wars. But that is possible only when they are not left wanting. Today, in our strategic scenario, we have two kinds of budget requirement. One is in the deterrent field. You need fighter aircraft, you need submarine, you need missiles and other things. These may never be required, but they are deterrent. If they are not there, then they may be required. The other is the equipment, which is not big ticket, but we are using every day on the western border. Look at the soldiers. They don't have proper bulletproof jackets, night vision devices, not even the correct body armor which can take on the steel pierced bullet which the terrorists are using. How do you feel that a soldier will think about it when he knows that the terrorist is carrying a better weapon than I am carrying? I think that's a very sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
Make in India, you highlighted one aspect, which is the Prime Minister's dream, which the army cannot pursue with this kind of budget. So I think we need to, defense may be unproductive budget. At the end of the year, he may have nothing to show concrete on the ground, except maybe the infrastructure in the border areas. But otherwise, it is like the health ministry can show hospitals or the aviation ministry can show airports.
Right.
Defense will say, well, we were secure last year, we are secure this year. It's not a tangible thing that you can show, but it is still very much required. Unless that is there, nothing else can happen in the country.
Ajai Shukla, when we spoke earlier today, you said that you're not at all surprised by what you've heard here from the Vice Chief of the Army Staff, as well as the numbers, because this is along expected lines. This is what we've seen happen over the last few years. But I go back again to the issue of preparedness and the issue of concern. And let me quote to you from the committee. The committee fervently urges the Ministry of Defence to ensure that the allocation to the services be suitably enhanced at the revised estimate stage so as to enable our services to meet the requirements of the highest level of operational readiness. The committee, in wake of recent attacks on military stations and accommodations, recommend that a separate budget may be provided to the services for ensuring security of the military establishment. Now, my understanding is that this already exists, but the budget hasn't been allocated for it.
Yes, Shereen, the standing committee every year voices its concern in almost exactly the same phrases. I remember this happening year after year, going back to the UPA government. Now, the problem is that there is a limited allocation that can be made to defense. And the standing committee, if it were asked, that where exactly would you shift allocations from in order to fund the defense budget in the manner that you're recommending,
right,
I'm not sure that the standing committee would have a very good answer. So the problem is that there is a limited amount of funding. And the Army, Navy and Air Force, every October they prepare their projections for the budget in which they see we have our committed liabilities of X amount and we will buy Y amount of new equipment and therefore you need to give us X and Y. But the Finance Ministry customarily cuts it down by 40% or so and then gives a reduced allocation to the military. Now, it's all very well to say that they have to be funded correctly. And indeed, if you maintain an army, you better maintain that army in a manner that it's fit to fight. But the army is not blameless in this matter either. You know, over the years, manpower costs have become so heavy and manpower policy has been so poorly handled by the Army and the Navy and the Air Force that there is very little money left for capital expenditure. So I think really one needs to take a holistic view of all of this. The government needs to sit down with the military. They need to decide what capabilities we can afford as a country and what capabilities we can fund as a government, and then go ahead on that. Rather than this completely incoherent name-calling that is going on, and in which everybody seems like the victimized party.
Gentlemen, we will take a short break, but we continue with this very serious conversation that we need to have, and we'll talk about some of the solutions when we return.